Welcome to Season 4 of the Knack for Business podcast.
Today's show is brought to you by our K4B Profit Snapshot. Here's one question worth sitting with. If you stepped away from your business for 30 days, would it grow or contract? That answer tells you a lot about where you really stand. Try the free 5-minute snapshot. It measures process, profit, and personal freedom. Link is in the show notes.
Question to the audience. Why does your marketing feel busy, but buyers still feel confused? That's what our guest will help us unpack today. How to guide real people through the buyer's messy middle so your message builds trust instead of noise. He'll talk about practical ways to match how customers actually decide, not how we hope they decide, and how small businesses can stand out without big budgets. Our guest today is Martin Pietrzak from Pinch Marketing. He is the founder and president of Pinch Marketing, a boutique agency that helps technology vendors and partners create campaigns built around how real buyers make decisions, not how companies wish they would. With more than 20 years in tech, SaaS, and channel marketing, he has shaped growth initiatives for global names such as AWS, SoftChoice, Zscaler, and VM, guiding brands to step out of the sea of the sameness, speak with clarity, and earn genuine trust in crowded markets. Martin believes great marketing is part strategy, part empathy, and part courage to be different. A lesson he once reinforced during a canoe trip with his teenager that turned into an unexpected masterclass in teamwork and resilience. He's also a returning guest to the Knack for Business podcast. He brings practical insight, straight talk, and a storyteller's eye to the art of connecting businesses with the people they serve. Martin, absolute pleasure having you back here, sir.
It's a pleasure to be back. I'm happy to be here and talking to your audience about, the messy middle and how people buy today and how we need to fix that.
So as we were talking about messy middle and understanding what our clients want, marketing logic versus buyer logic, why are they not on the same page? Why are they not the same language for folks?
And I have to say, as a marketer, I have to feel guilty of that. I think marketers, what we like to do is we like to simplify it. We like to create a linear progression, from how people and simplify how people think and how people buy. And the reason we do that is because otherwise our life would be probably a little bit too complex. So I think the logic of a marketer really is all about this idea that there is these steps all in the right direction before the customer decides that they're ready to buy. Where, like anywhere from awareness, they find out about a product or service, they go evaluate it, and then they potentially go into the transaction of it. But the reality of it, of course, is not that simple. Buyers are, they're becoming much more educated because of all the information that's available to them. But it also, that creates a lot of tension in how they think about buying. There's so much information out there. There's so little attention available to them. So that process is far from linear. So they find out about something, but then they learn about it, but then they forget about it. Maybe they read some reviews and they talk to their friends. They go back to the website of whatever the product or service is. Then they forget about it. They come back later. They watch a YouTube video 3 days later. Then they talk to a friend about it. They hear, maybe they're just talking to some stranger at a party that mentioned something. And so that process, the logic of a buyer is far from linear. And I think that's where the biggest gap lies, is how to have those two worlds, meet, where, the marketer wants to go from here to there and predict what those steps will be in the linear fashion. And on the customer side, quite the opposite. What are we actually going through? One thing I didn't touch on is also the emotional aspect. People buy based on the emotions that they might feel about towards a particular solution or brand, which I think that sometimes we forget as marketers as well.
So interesting. What I'm taking away, and as you're describing stuff and doing the research, sometimes sitting with my spouse and we're watching a movie, and all of a sudden I'm getting stats fed to me. Oh, by the way, this actor was, et cetera. So people are doing the research. Do you find that you have to frame the conversation or frame the messaging so that, you knowing full well that they're going to go hunt out the information, that you're going to put that, what's the difference between my product, my service versus my competition? Are we the same? Apple to apple. But here's the personality. You like my personality? Is that something you have to kind of stage into it? Almost like the 5-minute warning before you tell your kids they have to go. It's bedtime. You have to give a heads up to guide them that way.
I think no. I think the answer is we shouldn't direct that conversation with the customer. The customer should direct the conversation. And I think the best thing you can do as a seller or just generally a representative of that product or solution is to really try and understand where are they at? What motivates them? What challenges are they trying to solve? So before you jump into any kind of comparisons between yourself and your competitors or why you think you're better, really, really listen. And I think that's really the big challenge I think a lot of sellers have. They jump into the pitch way too early. Rather than really understanding what the customer is. I'm not sure if you've ever been in that on a sales call before or even like yesterday, I'm getting some random call. The guy says, "How are you?" And then just jumps into this. He wants to sell me digital marketing services. And I'm like, maybe ask me what I do for a living. Maybe I would tell you that that's actually the business I'm in. And maybe I might not be interested in that because guess what? We're competitors and I have no interest in working with you. A simple question. Hey, what do you do? Would have solved that problem. But he just launched into this monologue for minutes long before I had to stop them and say, hey, hold on, time out here. Let me tell you something about what I do for a living. So I think that this is probably the biggest lesson is that we should listen way more than we do, speak less and trying to understand what the customer has. And only then go into and try to figure out, hey, and be honest and transparent and authentic about it. How does my solution actually fit the narrative on helping that problem? And sometimes it might not. And I think the honesty is also going to be necessary, saying, you know what, maybe this solution is not going to be good for you. So I think it's that level of that honesty and authenticity and listening is going to get you ahead rather than going into, saying why you're the best in the world.
Earlier, you were saying the emotion does the purchase, and I get it. Many a time I'm going, oh, I like that car. It just looks so pretty, right? I can see myself in there. And then later on, I'm going, is that a B2C approach or is that a B2B approach? And the reason I'm asking B2B approach, if you're doing a solopreneur or, a small, medium business, but if you happen to be, if your client happens to be corporate, right? And just, it's a monster or even a government agency. And as we all know, there's something called an RFP. How do you pitch it? Is the RFP giving you all the information the client really wants? You just have to kind of distill it, have a chat with them. Maybe, we kind of had to have a chat in mid-play. You can go through the purchasing department, but but if you're not familiar with that particular marketplace, how do you find the emotive piece to make that winning touchdown? Or is it emotive at all?
I think that we put too much effort in emphasizing the difference between B2C and B2B. At the end of the day, we're dealing with people. The buyers at a B2B organization may seem more formal, they may seem more professional, they may have a more of a front and saying, hey, this is what my company does. But there's always an emotional motivation behind it, right? So let's say I'm an IT buyer. I might say to you, I need a better cybersecurity solution. But what's maybe behind it on a personal level is maybe they've been burned before. Maybe their job is on the line. Their future is on the line. Maybe they have someone, maybe they're under attack by hackers and, or they want to really build up their brand internally. They really want to elevate. They want to get a promotion. Which is going to turn into more money. So I think as much as we think that it's always the motivation might be for the company that they work for as a B2B buyer, at the end of the day, they're also human and they are trying to, plus if they buy from you, what they also want from you is that will they be able to work with you as an individual? Do they trust you that you can deliver on the promise that you're putting in front of you, right? So there's a lot of exchange around trust. Because not only the whole days of like the saying, buy IBM because you'll be safest, that's no longer applicable, right? So you really have to listen for those cues from the buyer and vice versa. Can I work with those individuals, regardless of how great my solutions are, regardless of what I have on my presentation? There has to be this belief that I will be able to work with these individuals. So I don't buy this idea that we're that different in B2C or the emotions don't play. They certainly do play. But there's perhaps different motivations, but they're very much in play.
What taught you the most? Was it other buyers, an executive, a client, or someone outside of business that taught you about the buying style and understanding that whole dynamic?
The years in the trenches, I'd say, a lot of the mistakes that I've made, no question. I thought, the old school was, hey, as long as you understand the product and you can talk over and say as much as you possibly can in 2 minutes or less, the more they will hear, the more they will want to buy. But the old school ways is with the belief that the buyer was highly reliant on the seller to make that decision. Those days are over. and I feel like I'm dating myself by saying this, but 70% of the buying happens before they actually pick up the phone and call you. They probably consume 10 to 20 different pieces of assets, content, your website, your videos. Maybe they read reviews, maybe they talk to colleagues, peers. So there's a lot of interaction happening before they shortlist any organization they want to talk with. So when you jump on the call, you should assume that they know something about you. It's rare that somebody's just going to pick up the phone and call you randomly without knowing anything about you. So that's the first thing. So I learned that the hard way. That and sometimes the clients or executives or the proxies for those customers are like, oh, let me stop you there. You know nothing about a marketplace. So I really had to reframe, go into the learning mode, go in the curiosity mode, stop myself from talking. Start really listening for the cues, not just what they're saying, but also, even the body language. How are they reacting? What activates them? What are the things? What do they feel passionate about? Where do they feel some angst? So it's a combination of those things. So it's not just one any particular person, but it's usually some people who are great proxies for the actual buyer of their product. So not the buyer that you're selling to, but their customers. Those are really critical that you find those individuals. And as a marketer, I've learned to make sure those individuals are in the room. So if one person who is a good proxy for their customer base is not in the room, I say, hey, we're probably going to make bad decisions here today. Let's make sure we have someone in the room that really truly can give us the feedback as if it was a customer of theirs and how that's going to resonate or fail. And I think that's something we have to be welcoming of, that critique, that voice of the customer always.
Interesting having the proxy for the customer to be there. All right. And I get that. When a client comes to you and says, listen, I want to sell a product. I'm not getting much traction. I've probably got some things wrong. What type of research do you do? Do you do research on that whole market segment? Do you just narrow it, or do you keep it broad spectrum and going, yeah, you're marketing here, but your product would fit really nicely here? Do you do that type of comparison? Kind of there's more yield and it's almost like you're planting crops, right? A certain soil is not meant for all plants, right? Do you do that, or do you just look at the consumers or the buyers in that space? And
I would say
I let you fill the rest of the blanks in.
Yeah, for sure, Bernie. I would say there's a couple of things you said, and then I started chuckling internally because I'll tell you why. Because it's rare that customers will come to me and saying, hey, we think there's something wrong with our product and it's not selling. Usually they come and say, hey, how come our great product is not flying off the shelf? Because if more people knew about it, people would buy. And I think that's the first universal mistake I hear about, is that there is this conviction and this arrogance, perhaps you can call it, that I think I've created the best thing since sliced bread, and why the heck is it not flying off the shelf? So that's probably the first hard conversation, to say, well, I know you believe that. You're obviously the creator, the founder, you're in love with your own solution. I get that. But sometimes but what do your customers or prospects really say about this? Okay? And that's where the product market fit conversation is really critical and important, is trying to figure out, okay, well, how do you validate that? You think you built the best thing since sliced bread, but now you have to put it in front of people that you think are the right people and then test out those assumptions. And many times those assumptions are completely inaccurate. So what I typically do then is, depending, of course, on the kind of engagement and the budget and things like that, in the best case scenario, you actually have real conversations with real existing customers, prospects that they and more so people that they tried to sell to but failed for whatever reason, because those are the individuals that will tell you the real story. They have no connection with your brand, at least because they chose not to work with you. So listen to those folks. Why did they not buy? And then see if there's any commonalities between what you're hearing. And you'll be surprised that even after a few conversations, this picture starts forming around their true perception of what they think about the product or service. And that is the critical component, is making sure you have a mechanism in place that allows you to have those conversations with those prospects and those customers. And that's when it's the proxy might not be good enough, because if a founder is not going to listen to the sales guy, because he's going to point the finger at the sales guy saying, hey, you're just doing a terrible job selling my product. But at the end of the day, they might just be relaying the message that nobody wants to hear internally because it might be harsh. But the businesses that do well, especially small businesses do well, they're the ones who can pivot and can take that feedback in open-heartedly, without bias, without ego, and say, okay, holy crap, can I make this a change to adjust to what these customers are telling me? And then and then getting rid of this assumption that everybody is a customer. It's not. You have competitors out there. There's always somebody's going to do something better than you. So find that part of the market, that small slice of the pie that truly, truly is the best. And then go after that and better listen and adapt and change before you make any rash judgments or decisions.
Does price matter? And I'm thinking when you're doing an audit, for example, a financial audit, they talk about something called material significance. 100,000 sounds really big, but you put it next to $1 billion budget, right? And so if you have $100,000 budget and something's askew by 1,000, it's not dramatic. Does that have the same impact? I mean, if I'm selling a car, let's say I'm selling a fleet of cars to government agency, whatever, or delivery firm, larger dollar, right? And it has a lot of impact, for repairs and et cetera, versus I'm going to sell you some chocolate bars. Does that weigh a lot more, or does that change the tempo?
In terms of how you price or how you think about pricing, you mean, or
Reaching the customer at the end of the day. I mean, obviously, if you make a chocolate bar and no one likes eating it because it tastes like, not so good, you're not going to have uptake. But
I mean, hey, all these categories you mentioned have very different problems, right? Like the chocolate, for instance, right? I'm not in the B2C sector, but I'll take it. I'll take a stab at it.
Thank you.
What's the one thing that, is when you go into a grocery store or any kind of store, when you look at the sweets pile, the sweets shelving, right? I don't know about you, but I am overwhelmed with the choices, right? And the products that already have existing market share, they have the relationships with the stores and the chain, and they have, already market dominance and brand strength. Usually will be at eye level because that's how people buy. People will tend to look what's in front of them at the eye level first before you start looking down and where the bottom of the shelf is, literally for a reason, because that's the last thing people will check. So I think we're already overwhelmed with choice. So that's why they're, CPG brands are pumping so much money into advertising, making sure that those brands, those are in front of people in so many various ways so that it's easy for them to pick. But even then, you have a chocolate bar that costs, 50 cents, and you have a chocolate bar that presumably same volume of content that costs $5. And I think that's where the difference is you just had this, like the packaging, how you message, how you promote it. Like you could say, hey, one is made by a Michelin star chef, formula from his grandfather from Austria, only made with the cows that are milked in Switzerland. And we tend to buy into those signals because it's not just about taste. It's about the perception of the value. It's perception of what you get out of it, the pleasure that you may get out of this chocolate. If I'm thinking about that cow walking the, beautiful mountain somewhere in Switzerland, I'm almost seeing myself eating that chocolate in the mountains, right? So I think he's selling the vision, right? So, but with cars, I think there's obviously an emotional buy as well. But if you're talking about that example, a government buying a fleet of cars, hopefully they care less about driving on the beautiful mountain somewhere. The choices and the criteria they select to buy that product are very different. They'll probably go for the lifetime value of that vehicle. How long is this vehicle going to last? Is it fast enough? Does it have acceleration? Does it have, what's the cost of maintaining those vehicles? Geopolitical aspects. Okay, is it built in Canada? Is it built in NAFTA, country that we feel is friendly? I can't see these days, the government buying Chinese cars, although we do have new deals. But you know what I mean? Like, I think there's a lot of different criteria. I think emotion on that kind of buy is probably much lesser than with the chocolate. But at the end of the day, I think, yes, that probably plays a part.
So if you're a small company and you're selling a product, it's SaaS or even a widget of sort, is the messaging more important or is it the presence that's more important? And I'm thinking from the presence side of the fence could be like doing trade shows, or you're pounding the pavement, so to speak, like a beat cop. You're there and people get to know you, etc. versus a message, the chocolate bar message. You're having the Heidi experience when you're not anywhere near that.
Yeah, it's a $1 million question. I mean, small businesses, including my own, I would say, we have a very limited budget that we can use, right? So we will try to look at what's the mix of the investments, and we're going to closely monitor what works, what doesn't work. I would say being in front of people where includes your customers as a new business is probably always the right thing. Now, it doesn't have to be costly. You don't have to exhibit. You don't have to have a booth. But just being there, talking to people on the ground and understanding what their needs are, and just like handing them your product, saying, hey, let's have a chat. I'll give you a coffee and you can taste my new chocolate that, is the best of the best. I think being on the ground is certainly important in all businesses, I think, regardless if you're a 2-man operation or if you're a, 5,000-man operation. It's really critical that you have a mechanism to be in front of actual people. And then the rest, I think advertising, whatever platform, whatever channels you use is really going to be dependent on where your customers are, right? If I'm selling to, people over 60 who are affluent and they're not going to be on social media, right? They're not going to be on watching TikTok videos. Maybe their kids will and the grandkids will show them how to use it, but they might be listening to radio, maybe jazz radio. Maybe they're still reading newspaper in a physical format, right? So me throwing ads on YouTube for that demographic is going to be useless. So it's really trying to understand what I call the watering holes. Where do people go to educate themselves? Where do they go to learn? And if you're 60 plus and you still read the New York Times and Global Mails of the world, listen to jazz radio, like me doing the best advertising on LinkedIn or TikTok is not going to do anything. So it's really understanding where they're at. And that's what those face-to-face interactions are so important. You should always ask the question, hey, how did you find out about so-and-so product? Why did you buy this in this solution? What made you think about that? Is it because you heard it from a colleague? Is it because you saw some ads on the website? What drove you to make those decisions? I think it's really critical. I find small business owners, even when somebody calls them up out of nowhere, they fail to ask that question. And the question is simple. Hey, how did you find out about us? So that's the one step I would say you could do today. It doesn't cost you anything. If you're getting a call or an email, somebody asking about your service and solution, ask them, how did you find out about us? And that will give you some hints. And if you, after you ask that question 50 times, you'll know that this particular source works really well and that does nothing for you. So you can then massage your budgets accordingly.
Messy middle. Can you kind of unveil the story of what messy middle means and how does it flow through?
Yeah, I've hinted on that earlier when we talked about this linear relationship of what marketers think happens and what actually happens. It's called messy middle because the process or the path that the buyer takes is not a straight line and usually upward towards a sale. It looks like something like this, and this is not terminology that came from me, and I can't take the credit. There was a study done by Google. If you can imagine, Google has trillion of data points that they can compare and look against, and where they can measure those digital steps that people take, and sometimes not even digital, because with phones they know where we are, they know what stores we're going into, right? We know what transactions are being taken. So they have a very good grasp and understanding of what those steps are. And what they found is that the process is far from clean and linear. So, we talked about those chocolate bars, or not even chocolate bars, but let's say, how you even go about selecting a movie on Netflix, right? You go on Netflix, watch something else, and then there's a pop-up that shows up, or once you finish, it says, oh, recommend it. If you like this movie, then you might like that movie. And you just see the title. You ignore it, but at least you say, that there's some attention that was driven towards that alternative titles. And another day you get offline, you go talk to your friend in the kitchen having lunch and at your workplace, and you overhear them talking about, this great movie that they see. And then you hear the name of that movie and you're like, oh, wait, I think that's the same movie that I heard about. So then you go to your desk and you start, typing, you go into YouTube and watching a trailer or something like that. But then you're like, oh, I don't know if I like that, and then you walk away. Then you walk to a store. So I think, just giving you this directions that, it goes back and forth. It's never that like one thing that happens that drives a decision. It's multiple, steps that go back and forth. before. You're going to ultimately come home one day, a week later, 2 weeks later, say, and now you see this title again. You like, and you talk to your wife, hey, you know what? This thing just keeps popping up in my life. Let's watch and see what happens. I think that's the messy middle. The messy middle is that it's not as clean. It's not as easy to track. It's all over the place. And there's a lot of disparate points that influence you before you make that purchase decision. So messy.
Was there ever an instance in the process of marketing where that didn't go well, but it provided you that great insight, that provided that revelation that either you saw someone else do it or you've done it yourself? Was there anything that was kind of monumental that made you go, "Oh yeah, eureka"?
I wish I could say that there was like a lot of these eureka moments. I think it's kind of like the messy middle. It's every little change is incremental, small little insights that we take. I'm a big fan of experimentation and trying out new things. I think especially now with the advent of AI, it's going to be so much critical to really come up and challenge ourselves to come up with unique and different ideas and not be afraid of failure. I think I think that's my methodology. Hopefully you are, as a business owner, you will take that philosophy hard on and say, don't seek perfection. Try out things. Even if it's 80% done, try it out, see if it goes. If it has any promising response, then you can iterate, work with it some more. I think that was the biggest. It happened to me multiple times where I made a hypothesis. I thought I discovered, gold, and I had this epiphany. I'm like, oh my God, this is going to be the best of the best. And then I go on Google and sure enough, there was already people that did the same thing multiple times. I'm like, oh, right. Too late for that. I have one story actually. When I was thinking I still wanted to do a startup online, and I'm a vivid traveler. I've been around. You've mentioned, my trip with my kid. And sometimes I'm in the car just doing a road trip, and I thought I'm driving behind these interesting places. I don't have time to stop. I'm like, wouldn't it be cool if somehow my phone would just be telling me, hey, something interesting about that place. And I thought, oh my God, this could be the business, that it's basically GPS focused. It can tell you like, oh, you're driving through so-and-so town. In the next 5 minutes, look to your right because there's going to be this historical thing that you really need to stop for 5 minutes because it could be awesome, and tell you the story as you go. And I'm like, brilliant. I'm doing this. Of course, I went home. I started Googling it, and sure enough, it already exists. And I hated it because they'd done a great job. I downloaded it and I've used it multiple times when I was traveling, and it's really fantastic. And I'm thinking but again, so one search away of testing your assumptions is going to be important. Are those ideas truly unique? Are they really great? And can you do it better than what they've done already? And then don't be afraid to fail, right? If you try and you fail, adapt, change, and validate again. And because you're going to always learn more from your failures than you are from your successes. So it's rare that you have a unicorn out of the gate. Never is. We always see the founders who are like Facebooks of the world to talk about how they had this like random, idea that just turned into $1 billion. That doesn't happen in real life. What we don't see behind these founders is all the failures that came before the one that won, and the struggles that they had to go through in order to get there. So don't be afraid of failure, because that's what it's going to teach you the most.
On your travels, have you noticed either verbiage people use or on their websites, things they're expressing? They should retire. Get away from that. It's passé. And I say passé as in, yeah, we're not in 1950. You can't, your wife will be so happy if she does this. She'll have more free time, because things have changed, right? Is there anything that we unconsciously, through our own internal bias, still use that we should knock it off because it's not helping us?
I think the short answer is yes. I mean, as we age, and unfortunately, our kids are probably the best reflection of that. How irrelevant I feel sometimes talking to my 17-year-old kid, who will tell me like, Dad, you can't say this stuff anymore. Was off the cuff joke or, something that was maybe risque, but it's like completely like inappropriate today. So yes, I was even talking to someone recently. I was talking to some millennial, and I'll generalize them as millennial because they're obviously much younger than I. And we talked about, they said, oh, I was watching the show Friends. Did you ever watch it? I'm like, yeah, that was a really popular show when I was at university. And they're like, oh yeah, I kind of like it, but it's kind of passé. I'm like, And I'm like, what do you mean? A lot of the jokes are completely off and they wouldn't survive today. And I'm like, interesting. So, but I think the thing we need to be careful of is don't judge the new generation. Because obviously they are going to be the future, not us. And stay curious, like what makes them, why are those changes taking place? What's the reason and rationale? And ultimately, either adapt or become relevant. Or, I mean, it depends who you're selling to. I mean, from a business perspective, you better adapt because otherwise you won't exist. But if in personal life, yeah, you can still tell, bad jokes to your friends and buddies after over a beer. But if you want to do the same with your customers, you might, lose a few. So yeah, I think definitely stay curious. Talk to your younger kid, your younger family members. They will tell you what is or what won't work, and test it out. If you're a CEO of a company that sells to a younger audience, you shouldn't be the one calling the shots. It should be them calling the shots, or definitely the people who are working with you, who are representative of your target audience, because they will be much more in touch with those needs of those customers than yours. You might think they're crazy, but it's not for you to judge. It's for them to judge. So
It's their coin that they're spending.
exactly, right? Like if you want to, I mean, you could be stubborn about it and you say, I'm not going to sell to these people. But, I think that's just arrogance and just being
creating an opportunity for your competition.
right.
So I guess that's why someone would reach out to Pinch then, is to go, hi, I got a box of cars with chocolates. What am I not doing right?
I think, you know what? I think that takes a lot of guts to be able to come up with and say something like that. It's rare. I think it really is rare. I think that the conversation that I would have with that person is to say, okay, let's see, where are you seeing? Tell me everything I need to know about your business, your customers, what you're trying to sell, what are you trying to own in what space, and have a non-threatening conversation to learn as much as you can about them, and then do the same about their customers. And then, trying to figure out, formulate some thesis of what the new model could look like for them. So I think that's kind of what we would approach it. We typically would do a workshop type of environment where we, drink from the fire hose, learn for as much as we can, and then formulate some ideas and what could be the potential strategies and methods and tactics that we could employ to test out and experiment with to see what could stick. Or sometimes decide that and have a really hard conversation saying, hey, we did the analysis and I don't think there is a market for what you're trying to do. And that conversation, that could be the output of the conversation as well. So that's typically what we would recommend, not just us, but just any marketing agency. But I think, or if you want to do it yourself, that's probably the way to do it.
We haven't touched on it yet, or we skirted past it. So would AI be, I'll take an email before I send it out, and I just, I'll write it in my own headspace, right, and I fire it out. Usually, there's a word missing somewhere in the text, and I'll take it and I'll go, ChatGPT, provide clarity in this conversation at a grade 6 level, and casual tone. Boom, comes back going, it's my content, but reframed prettier, for lack of better words. Is that something where you would leverage AI then to, Kate, kind of got these are here are the sub bullet points. How do I shape the message, and what do I write in the message so that it has clarity to this particular audience? Is that part of the process too?
I think what you're describing is what a lot of people do. But I would caution you not to rely on AI too much. First thing I would do with AI is to teach AI as much as it needs to know about who I am, how I think, how I talk, how do I sound, well, how do I write? It's going to be important because if you want AI to mimic your writing style, that it will get much closer to what you actually sound like. Because at the end of the day, people sniff out AI pretty damn quickly. So if what I do sometimes is kind of like I have very rough notes, especially after a client call, and I'll have like transcripts from the conversation like we're doing today, and I throw it into AI and then give them few different prompts and say, it's already been trained in my voice, and say, hey, I want to say this, and this, write it in a short and my tone and reply to this email. And then I take that, and then I also tweak it and throw in some humanity into it. Some maybe personal comment that was made in the conversation had nothing to do with business, but maybe about, the weather that we talked about earlier, right? How Ottawa is, -7 and -15 in Toronto. So I think that makes sense to inject humanity into the mix and also not to rely too heavily on it. So, and especially if you're throwing in content that's dense, there's a lot of it, like from a transcript from a conversation. I just got a notes from yesterday's call I had with a vendor. I read it and I'm like, it got it completely wrong. So hallucinations are still very much a thing. Be careful so it doesn't misinterpret what the meaning of it was. Don't trust it too much. Don't get lazy with it, right? Because I think, I'm looking at the kids, including my own, who just rely on it so heavily. They just assume it's going to be correct. And I'm like, don't do that. Put some thought into it. It's a great tool. It can do a lot of work for you, but don't give away, what's in here and what's in your head and in your heart, and that makes it unique to you. So,
are there any three key takeaways you would want to provide the audience to understand about marketing? They're about to launch. I mean, that's pretty broad. Let me narrow it down. They're about to launch a new product. What are the three key points they should be paying attention to?
Yeah, I think before you go with a big launch, don't go with your own personal assumptions. Validate with a small subgroup of your prospects or customers who can tell you, is this going to resonate with them? Number one. So get in the mind of the consumer is going to be number one. Number two, again, don't assume one message and one offer is going to do it. Play around, experiment, try out different things, do A/B testing, allow flexibility for failure, and do the same thing with your audiences. Don't always assume if you think it's for this individual, don't be afraid of putting it in front of other individuals, because guess what? You might find that your assumptions were wrong. So I guess the third one is really trying to be honest with yourself. It's not about you. It's not about your ego. It's about your customers and prospects. If you believe, maybe you'll find and everybody will agree with you. But at the end of the day, one biggest lessons I've learned is that your instincts might be right half of the time, but at the end of the day, your customers will tell you more than you probably want to know about what they truly think about your product and service and you and your business. So don't take it too personally.
Martin, if someone says, "Hey, listen, I need a pinch of salt here. Help me out." Sorry, bad pun.
No
How do
worries.
they get a hold of you? How do they make that connection?
Well, I think the easiest way to do that is look me up on, I was going to say looked on LinkedIn, but that would require to remember my first and last name, which is not the easiest. So I think probably the easiest is to go to my website. It's pinch.marketing. It's no .com. It's just pinch.marketing. So it's hopefully simple enough. And yes, just to make that story stick, the reason we called it pinch was not necessarily because of pinch of salt, but because we were very much in a pinch ourselves and we felt that some of our customers are in a pinch and we're here to help. So if that's going to make you remember, if you're ever in a pinch, look us up.
Perfect. Do you have any special offerings or any podcasts or books out there?
Yeah, we do. For those of you who are marketers who are already in the field, I do interviews with partner marketers. It's called the Pinch of series. You can find us on YouTube or you can find us on LinkedIn. I do say that it's more designed for those who are already on the marketing trade, especially in the partner marketing field. I talk to people sometimes far smarter than me, and I'm using that as a way to learn. But if you want to learn more about marketing, partner marketing, and channel marketing, I highly recommend you go check it out on YouTube. So it's called Pinch of series on YouTube. So
I say thank you to Martin Pietrzak. Really appreciate your time today and great having this conversation. And just know that whether you're going to sell candy bars, cars, Martin has a way to help deliver the message and take your message and engage the client with it. It might mean a little bit of transmutation, or maybe there are other opportunities that are out there.
Everything you heard today is for educational purposes only. It's not professional advice. Before you act on anything, talk to a certified expert in your area. Your accountant, your lawyer, someone who knows your situation. We share perspectives. You make the decisions. Want more? Head over to blog.knack4business.com, packed with practical episodes on AI, marketing, leadership, and growth. No fluff, just the good stuff. Subscribe while you're there. Until next time, keep building.